Hello, and welcome to Civic Alliance Latvia podcast. And today we are here with Dr. Dženifera A. Teilori. She is expert in philanthropy, volunteerism, civil society, and she's from United States of America. Dear Dr. Teilori, could you tell something more about yourself? Please introduce yourself.
Yes, I have been a college professor for the past 10 years. And before that, I worked in nonprofit management, and I did a lot of work and volunteer work with youth service organizations, youth sports, youth development. At one point, I've managed a homeless shelter. I've worked for a conservation organization. So I like to tell my students, if there's any nonprofit cause out there, I have worked in it, and so I am very familiar with all of the different challenges from field to field. So it is something that I've always been doing. Initially, when I left high school, I thought I was going to be an artist and that I was going to float away to New York City and, curate the best art exhibitions, and that was going to be my life. But on my first day of college, I sat down behind a Navy pilot, and he was just so dashing and romantic. I married him, and 27 years later, I am not an artist in New York City. Instead, I teach people how to make the world a better place.
This is such a great story, really. Yeah, I wish we had more Navy pilots here in Latvia that could motivate people.
It was totally random. He sat down behind me in class.
Okay. And I know that you have done a lot of research on what makes people do the good deeds and become motivated in public sector work, philanthropy, civic society. And what are these reasons what make people do good things?
Right. Well, the first reason is most obvious, right? They're human. Mm. And I think that offers us an opportunity for just to take a beat and remember that everyone in this world is just another human who wants to be loved, wants to care and provide for their family, and they have this innate hope for a better future. And when you're working in a nonprofit, it's your job to kind of identify what moves people and give them opportunities to kind of self-actualize in your organization through volunteer work or giving. It's our role to just focus in on what their motivations are, and it works kind of like a lever system. We have this great American movie that transcends national cultures called The Wizard of Oz. And so when you get to the end and you finally meet this super scary wizard, right? He's like 4 feet tall. Yeah. And she pulls back the curtain and he's back there just like pushing buttons and levers, getting people to act and do what he wants them to do. And that's kind of the role of a nonprofit leader. It's our job to just kind of like be behind the scenes and push buttons and levers and create opportunities for people to just be human and to love each other.
And what's the reason why some people doesn't really care about these issues? Haven't they found their Wizard of Oz?
I know. That's a very eloquent way to say that. So maybe they haven't found their Wizard of Oz, right? But, Dorothy didn't get all the way to the wizard by herself, right? So she had the help of her friends and family to get there. And what we see in that moment is that, she's an individual, yet she's part of a team and she's part of a family. And she would have not successfully made that journey all the way to the center of Oz and then all the way back out again by herself. she had to lean on the support of others to do that. And so when we find people that don't care or are uninterested, perhaps it's that they haven't been asked in a meaningful way, or they feel like in some way that no one cares about them individually, because when you stop and you listen to them individually, then you begin to hear what their barriers are. You know, the research that has been done in this area, particularly in the US, but there has been some cross-cultural research around the world, kind of defines this as public service motivation. And you know, I see this in my classes because no one comes to college and declares that they want to be a public policy and administration major. Like, that does not happen in the US on its own. On day one, 18-year-olds come in and say they want to be a policy analyst. Like, it just never happens. But what does happen is that we have a very competitive business school at our university, and students will get halfway through the business school program and they can't really put their finger on why they don't like it. It's very competitive. It's very cutthroat. About 60% of the students fail out of the program just before their junior year, and they have to find another major. So they come to me because I have management in the name, and they end up, and the first thing I do is I give them a values inventory, and I let them identify the values they think are most important in work and in themselves. And what they articulate are all values that are public service oriented values, things that you want people in your community to care about: equity, justice, fairness, accountability, transparency. These are all public and nonprofit civil society oriented values. They're grounded in something that is uniquely public interest oriented. And if I were to give the same value survey to those business school students, what I would find is they don't choose those values. Right? They choose values like individualism, liberty, but not liberty in like the French Revolution version of liberty, not like that. Liberty like capitalism, right? Without bounds, unchecked capitalism. And so they're choosing very market-oriented values, which are self-interested or company interested, right? And it's just not consistent with the value set that people who have a high public service motivation have. And so when we started in this field investigating, why is it that some people will sacrifice everything for the sake of others and other people won't? What is the difference, right? And the US operates on a completely all volunteer military, one of the most highly trained militaries in the world and well-resourced, that has primarily a humanitarian mission associated with it. And so we want to know how do we survive with this? And then how do we get people to sign up for this? And then who signs up for it and why do they sign up for it? And when we look back at the research, we find that there are kind of 5 dimensions of public service motivation. And these servicemen and women kind of peg out on all of them. So they are compassionate to a fault. They have deep levels of compassion. They are empathetic, right? So they can instantly put themselves in the shoes of the other people around them. They manage to, this is pretty unbelievable, but believable, because it's very rare that I have students in my classes that peg out on self-sacrifice. And self-sacrifice sounds exactly like what it sounds like. Are you willing to throw yourself on an IED to save the people around you, right? Very few students will peg out on self-sacrifice. But if you do, my research suggests you're more likely to be very successful in the military as a profession because you have this particular value, and it informs everything that you do. The other pieces are like attraction to public policy making, and I think I've covered them all. So I think that those 5 dimensions are really, really powerful because they are dimensions that we don't see in motivation theories for other types of populations. But I think the larger question here is okay, now that we know what makes people different, public service oriented versus private sector and the market. How do we bottle this and give it to everyone in times of crisis?
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Can we add it to the water supply? Like some doctors are big advocates of putting statin heart drugs, which prevent high cholesterol and heart attacks. They just want to give it to everybody and just put it in the water supply. We won't have to worry about prescribing it. But how do you do that? Well, the research shows that you have to, your country and your community has to be really focused in on harnessing, teaching, and really being very strategic about how you raise the next generation. Because the generation that comes after, who is leading the country now, the generation that comes after is going to be the generation that leads in the future. And they won't have had the same experiences as you. And you can't assume that they have, or that they heard, or they were paying attention. So it's important to develop kind of a civic values kind of educational program. And you can do this in a number of different ways. So you could have third party run by NGOs, kind of character education in the school system, and public service opportunities. So like they're doing, food drives or resource drives, and they're learning in depth about each one of those public service values and how that manifests in their life. There's lots of case study work, and they talk to each other and with their group leaders about how they can be better people and how they can identify problems in their community and how they can build a team of stakeholders that can help solve the problems. And so this has happened kind of on its own in the US and started around the turn of the century. They founded Boy Scouts of America and Girl Scouts of America. And Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts are now global organizations, but the content from country to country is the same. And it's all about building a generation of people who will become leaders in their country, leaders for peace, leaders for prosperity, leaders for collaboration and teamwork in communities.
Yes, we do have Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts here in Latvia. Scouts and Guides, the program is called here, yes. And currently they're also very involved in supporting Ukraine, the people from Ukraine who come to Latvia. So they're really, really big help.
Well, my husband laughs at me all the time because he has these mad, crazy skills from the Defense Department, right, that are logistics oriented. So anything that has to happen now, or anything that has to be, it's an emergency, it's a life or death situation. You need to fly to Antarctica and deliver water, or you got to send a case of water via a heavy lift helicopter drone to the side of a mountain in Afghanistan. He's really in need all of the time. And I laugh at him and I'm like, you're in need now. I'm not so much in need. But I will be in need one day when there's like a huge zombie apocalypse and we have to rebuild society from the ground up. Like I'm a post-conflict girl. I come in after and I can help rebuild a government, rebuild a community, build a school system, harness people's talents and energies and get them going again. But until then, I'm usually pretty good at trivia. So, and making art with my kids, but I keep, hoping for the day that I'm going to get the call. It says, Dr. Taylor, will you come help us? Yes, I will. So one of the things that we talked about in preparation for this was like the role that parental role modeling and service learning plays. And that's something that I've been able to pass down to my own children because we're not active in a particular faith. And so much of our personal lives in the U.S., particularly in rural areas like the community we live in, revolves around your church and specifically your Protestant church. And our family is Catholic. And there are just very few, where we live at, very few Catholic churches around, maybe 2 for an 8-county area. It's a huge area. And so we don't have a lot of opportunities to get that kind of social service role modeling and community caring opportunities in our family's life. So we have to create opportunities for that to happen for our children. So we identify opportunities for volunteering, and we teach our children how to address, solve, and be supportive, right? So there is a snow day and the kids aren't in school and there's snow everywhere and we're not going to work. What do we do, right? Most people would say, I am going to have a binge watch this new series on Netflix. We're going to have popcorn. It's going to be great. That's not what happens in our house. In our house, I say, there are people out there who can't shovel their driveways. And if they have an emergency, they're going to need to get to the hospital. And you're 15. Here are some snow shovels. Go. To shovel.
And they really go and they really shovel.
They really go and they really shovel, and we reward them, right, with opportunities after. But we want them to think that when the snow falls, it creates a problem for someone else. And it's your responsibility to think about those other people and think about what are the unintended consequences of an unexpected snowfall in a community with a lot of old people, right? All throughout COVID, we did the grocery shopping for our neighbors. We drove them to medical appointments. So there was a lot of caring, and our family doesn't live near us. Plight of a military family, right? We're always stationed places where our friends and family aren't located. So we have to create family for ourselves and be connected in a very specific way to the community. And so we look for opportunities for our children to help. And then we want to do it so much that we don't have to initiate it anymore. All of a sudden, the children are coming to us and saying, I see a problem and I see how we can help,
Exactly.
And one of the other just simple activities that we do as a family is that we watch the news together every night, the national news on NBC. And we watch it. And then when the commercial breaks come on, it's muted. And the children can ask me any questions. And the news is not good. The imagery that is coming across, because like the few conflicts that have happened since Gulf War I, we now are experiencing these wartime images live as it happens. And so that presents a lot of questions for people and for children especially. How do we encounter this and how do we deal with this? Early on, my son was, this was several years ago, and he asked me on a commercial break, well, Mom, what is worse, an F5 tornado or a terrorist bombing? Like, which one's worse? And so I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, you're 5. Like, why are we having this conversation? Oh my God, you're 5 years old. I meant to for you to be smart and intelligent, but really at 5?
He's watching the news.
He's watching the news. Yeah. He was like, so how do I know which one to be more afraid of? And I was like, well, they're both random. And so I had to explain what random was. So, but one of them was not something that was randomly created, but one of them came with bad intentions. So the tornado happened. It was totally random, but there was no person behind it that decided, I'm going to make a really bad tornado today and it's going to hurt all of these people. But there was a person who put together that pressure cooker bomb and walked it into a marathon. And so now we have to talk about random and bad actors. This began this whole series of conversations with him that have now occurred over a decade, and it blows me away. And all it took was just to be willing to have a conversation with your children. That's difficult, but children are very, very resilient, and they'll remember that conversation, and then they will begin to apply it in their lives. And when you see that, it's magical because you can see it happening. So when you're in a community, like when I was in Kosovo, I was blown away by, there's an entire generation of people that don't exist in Kosovo because they were slaughtered. There's no Generation X. There are baby boomers and millennials, and that's it. And 75% of the population is millennial. And so I was very concerned, right? That where is where are the public service values that are being created in this country? And everybody it appeared on the service that, there was an active NGO community, but it was very disconnected from the university life in the country. Mm-hmm. And I felt like if there were opportunities for partnership and collaboration that could bring the students, K-12 and the university together with the NGOs, that would create an opportunity for community building and resiliency. Mm-hmm. And we see like the immediate benefit of an active, vibrant civil society in Ukraine right now, because they're surviving for two reasons. And I never in a million years thought that they would last this long, but they're surviving for two reasons. Mm-hmm. Number one, they have this intense love for country and for each other. And our research here, there's an author, his name is George Fredrickson, and he calls it the patriotism of benevolence. And to me, that is really powerful. It's not just about love of country, but love of humanity and all of the wonderful values that come with that. So when you're willing to extend grace, benevolence means extending grace and love even when nothing is warranted. So being mm-hmm. kind to people even when they don't deserve your kindness. And so when you put that together with love of country, it then becomes the patriotism of benevolence, which is love of humanity. And that becomes it's so crystal clear in the people who are volunteering to fight. And in the ways that they're volunteering, there are people making camouflage dressing, right? So they're in a theater company and they're ripping apart fabric and then they're sewing that together and tying it together to make supplies for the soldiers that need them. And so all of that is mm-hmm. really, really powerful. So you have this patriotism of benevolence that's happening. And then on the other side, you have this deep network of collaboration and community resiliency that is rising to the surface. And I hypothesize that communities who have a vibrant civil society with lots of NGOs working in really positive ways, when something bad happens, because you already have those open pathways and relationships, your community is more resilient. You're more likely to come together as a group and accomplish really positive things that no one thinks you can accomplish.
But what is that we could do to build these strong communities and strong civil society in the time of peace? And so we would be better and then stronger when
prepared.
Hopes that and prepared, for crisis.
Right. So some of the things that you can do are just look for simple problems to solve in your community, problems that can't be solved by any one organization or group. So look for problems that are large enough that require collaboration and keep going after that. Another key component is, really ensuring and protecting the idea that you have a free press, so open access to media that isn't filtered and so you can keep having these types of conversations, both within your country and with each other, and then with, people from other countries. And you just have to look for opportunities for collaboration. One of the things that I'm very active in USA swimming. All three of my children are competitive swimmers. My daughter was very close to going to the Olympics in 2021 for swimming on the US swim team. And one of the things that we've witnessed over the years is that only white, affluent children get access to the opportunity to swim because pools in the US are private. And this goes back to kind of our systemic racist history. So when Blacks started to integrate into the rest of America in the 60s, all of the public pools were closed. So to keep Blacks from integrating with whites and swimming in the pool at the same time, they just decided to close all the pools. And then all of the white affluent families built these private pools instead at country clubs and so forth. And so what that created was we have generations of Black families who don't know how to swim. And it's very clear. So if you were to go to like a Navy boot camp, they line them all up in rows to jump in the pool to do the swim test. It's a very easy swim test. Swim from one side of the pool to the other side without touching the bottom. Doesn't matter how you do it, just get there. And all the white guys go in, and all the white guys swim across the pool, and then all the Black guys come in, and they jump in, and they sink right to the bottom. Yet they're joining the Navy. I'll never understand it, but they don't know how to swim. And it's crazy apparent. And then you can look at our Olympic swim team, and there are no Black members on the swim team.
Diversity.
One. And that's it.
Okay.
So, there is a systemic problem in terms of access to that sport. And while it's not really a crisis per se, there are things that we can do to draw attention to that can help solve that problem, right? And one of the big things that we found out, and my daughter and I have been working on this, is that it's all about swim lessons. So when the pools closed, the Black families had no one to teach their children how to swim, and the parents couldn't swim, so they just stayed away from water, period. They just didn't do that. And if we just give everybody the opportunity for free to learn how to swim as a life skill, that would dramatically change everything. Less children would drown, more people would live. Then these people who know how to swim would then teach their children how to swim and their grandchildren how to swim. And it's a really simple thing, but all you have to do is remove the barrier. And it's not something that any one organization in a community can solve. It's going to require like a multi-sector collaboration, a movement. And so building social movement, it's important. And you have to be able to do this in peacetime, solving big problems like that during peacetime, because you'll already have those relationships established and you know who to call. There is a theory in marketing literature called the trust commitment theory. And basically, if you want someone to buy something from you, before they buy, they have to trust you, right? I mean, that's why we're always super suspicious of used car salesmen, right? Because everybody can trust them and they're going to sell you a lemon car for an inflated price, right? But there is something to be learned there, right? And so by volunteering in these ways during peacetime and modeling to your children how to solve problems in their community and building this kind of all-inclusive network approach to building public service values in the next generation and getting them to care about each other and what their community looks like and how we respond to things, and being really open with the next generation about what's happening in the world and how we can go about solving it or stopping it. Doing all of these different strategies builds this community resilience that I think is really, really powerful.
And actually, it's when you speak about the swimming, it reminds me the same is about the civic education. You could put swimming on your curriculum, and you could put civic education on curriculum. And so people would learn to swim, they wouldn't drown, and they would learn to volunteer and to do good things. And there we would have a better society, better and safer.
Yeah, one of my experiences when running a homeless shelter in Corpus Christi, and it was for young women, targeted towards young women and their children specifically, and the women were trying to leave their families and connections to the Mexican drug cartel. So it was very dramatic and a little scary sometimes, right? Because they would come after and looking for the women and their children. But what we found was, not a lot of people want to volunteer in a homeless shelter because it makes them feel bad about their own lives. And for super compassionate people like me, it's difficult because I want to start putting people up in the garage in my house. So I had to put some separation there. But one of the most reliable volunteer groups that we had were people that were mandated to volunteer from the court system. So kids that got in trouble and they go to court and the judge says, you need to do 300 hours of community service as your punishment. Not many NGOs will take someone who's been court ordered for community service. And I'm like, well, as long as they're not a sex offender or murderer, I got them. Bring it on. I don't care what they've done. And those were my very best volunteers. They ended up having these like powerful emotional experiences helping other people that was therapeutic for them. And so their time would end that's been mandated by the court. I would sign off on all of their hours. And those kids would keep coming back because it was an opportunity for them to just be themselves. They didn't have to hide what they did or why they were there. They were just able to be themselves and to help. And, that was, witnessing the impact that something as simple as preparing a meal for a support group, like it was a powerful moment for them. And it was a powerful moment for me. So I love so I know firsthand like how this changes people's lives just on an individual basis. But then when you watch it happen across a community, it is super powerful. So another example is in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. It was very difficult in their recovery from that hurricane, that community, because they didn't have these pre-established relationships of problem solving and community building before the hurricane. Their civil society network was weak and they were less likely to respond. Now, there were lots of beautiful stories that came after the hurricane, but they needed a lot of help in building that network back up. And because they didn't have that, vibrant civil society before the hurricane, they then, people were left out in the emergency planning and were not part of it. And so they were left behind in the city. And I remember those horrible images from the Astrodome and, people on rooftops waiting to be rescued and people who didn't get rescued. I mean, it was quite moving and sad. And I just kept wondering, how could this happen? How could this happen in the U.S. that it's like this? But then you look at a different disastrous event in the U.S. and you see people came together after 9/11 in the New York community. They had a very resilient community there that was different from New Orleans. So the experience of people in that community and their ability to be resilient was very, very different. And I have to think that it has to do with the values and the experiences of the families that live there and those pre-existing relationships between community groups.
And is there some way that we can work with these communities through public policies, for example?
Yes. So I would start first with, your Department of Education to kind of identify what is the character curriculum that we would like to implement and how do we do that in the existing school system? How do we add in components as the students get into middle school and high school that involve service learning, where they're having supply drives or they're working on, we call them done in a day projects. So a project that can be completed in one day, whether they're painting a house or building a wheelchair ramp, thinking along in those capacities, right? And it's going to take public policy to change or implement at the national level a change in the curriculum, right? So I would look there and then, encourage the organizations in your network to think about how can they invite families to participate in their mission. So I'm always looking for opportunities for my family that we can volunteer together, right? Much to my children's chagrin and disappointment, I have stopped celebrating Christmas. Because I feel like, they're not happy with me. But I have stopped celebrating Christmas in the traditional American way because it just bothers me. I feel so guilty about all this stuff, like buying stuff, and there are people who don't even have enough food to eat or a place to sleep on Christmas Eve. I would rather be with them, like cooking a meal, serving a meal. That, I should be operating from a place of, and they should be operating too from, gratefulness. So I stopped celebrating Christmas. And now we're cooking meals, large meals at our home, and then taking them to the shelter, and we're serving there instead. And it feels really, really good. They still get presents, but like there's not a big like production occurring, because I can't have that experience without thinking about who's not there.
Yeah, it's a celebration with a meaning and with a reason, and makes you feel much better.
And yeah, it's self-interested in a way, but then it's also not self-interested, right? It's self-interested in a way because it makes me feel better to be out there. But and there is that warm glow, dopamine-inducing component of helping other people. At the same time, it feels really good. You know, when you're dead and gone, your gravestone is not going to say, I wish she would have worked more hours at her job, or I wish she really would have bought me a new pair of AirPods for Christmas. You're going to talk about the good things that you did in your life, and I want to make sure they have good things to say.
Yeah, that's
self-interest things. I want to be remembered for the change that I helped create in the world.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you right now. We are running a bit out of time now, so some of the last questions we still haven't touched. One of these is that about we do have in Latvia here a lot of people who doesn't trust NGOs, who doesn't believe in the cause and so on, and we know that it's a lot of about building trust and showing our good deeds and working with communities. But maybe you have some advice, some recipe we could do to work with this trust issue in society.
Well, operating as an NGO with accountability and transparency. And we do have some kind of third-party watchdog groups in the U.S. that monitor nonprofits and the work that they're doing. And, you know, they're nonprofits themselves. So, you know, we have the Better Business Bureau's Charity Alliance, Charity Navigator, and you can go through and you get scores as an organization based on your accountability, your transparency with your finances and what you're reporting. They have criteria for what you should have available on your website to anyone who is coming to look and answer. The meeting should be open and accessible, and you should provide your financials and your annual report and so forth on there. And honor, we now have a Bill of Rights for donors. And so honoring that Bill of Rights for donors is very important. And then I think what really I think is the most powerful trust factor is this idea of building evidence-based research in your policy interest area, and then taking that evidence-based research and communicating your mission and the potential solutions to everyone else. So when there is a particular problem, elected officials, community leaders are going to think about your organization, right? And bringing your organization in to help solve the problem. And so I think that is the most important thing that you could do to build trust. So doing those kind of nuts and bolts, accountability and transparency recommendations that our third-party watchdog groups here have. And you can also facilitate, if you don't have a third-party watchdog group in your country, you could also facilitate the creation of one of those.
Actually, we are working right now with accountability criteria. We are translating the accountability criteria like this handbook for NGOs for accountability. And me personally, I have had so many experiences when you see the reason why you have to have your team in a web page. For example, when you call somebody and say you are from this and that organization, and they're just, you can hear them Googling you. And after that, I can talk to you. So having that kind of
handbook for like, here are the things that you need to be doing, and it earns them like a badge of, approval that they can put on their website. So all of those pieces are really, really important. Doing things like this podcast and, telling the story of what organizations are doing, the success they're having is critically important. I think another factor is you have to look at the balance of international NGOs that are working in your country and then domestic NGOs. And so people are more likely to trust the NGOs that are local and locally grown, right? And so the more that you can support the work of the organizations that are developing and growing on their own in Latvia is best. And so you'd like to have less international NGOs and more domestic NGOs in your country, because that is going to be the fastest way to grow trust. Because people see international NGOs coming in and doing work, and then international NGOs leave, and you're still left behind holding all of the pieces. So people are more likely to trust people in their community who are already doing that work. So I would encourage the growth of the domestic-based NGOs and have less reliance. And there's a lot of really large ethical questions about international NGOs and why are they there and what is their motivation, right? When really we should just be worried about helping each other. So
that's
and when
right.
you look at what's happening in Ukraine, and that is just so close to where you are, the difference that the success, the things that are happening in Ukraine are happening through these pre-existing networks of support. And it's powerful, quite powerful to see and witness all of that happening. So I think one of the last questions you had for me was about the podcast that I listened to.
Yes, exactly. I know that you like podcasts. you listen to them a lot. So could you?
I listen to everything on National Public Radio here in the U.S. So anything NPR, it's actually a nonprofit broadcasting company in the U.S. and it says National Public Radio, but it's not actually state-run. They're a nonprofit organization, media group, which I said earlier is so important to maintain. But everything NPR, and they have like a bazillion podcasts. All of their shows are available as podcasts. So I listen to them a lot, and they're funny, silly ones like Wait, Don't Tell Me, which is really like a club for really smart people with no money and no life. So it's just a bunch of nerds getting together and laughing, which I think is funny and uplifting. And then I listen to a pair of scholars, and they have a podcast called No Stupid Questions. And the one scholar, Dr. Angela Duckworth, is a industrial organizational psychologist. So she studies the why people do the things they do at work, right? And the other guy is an economist from Harvard, and he understands why people make consumption decisions. And they sit down and they break down the most stupid questions. And they call it, there are no stupid questions. Like, is this rash of self-improvement, right? Like, what color is your parachute? And personality quizzes. And like, is this rash of self-improvement books and self-improvement movements really just self-interested people? Or do they think that if they participate in all this self-improvement stuff, that somehow that's going to make the world a better place? So is it self-interested or is it not self-interested? And they go through all kinds of terms. And it's hysterical, and they break it all down. You end up coming to your own decision and understanding anyway, but it is 28 minutes long every week, and they're hysterical. And so those are the two podcasts that I listen to the most. I do listen to another podcast called ADHD for Smart Ass Women. And so I am a neurodiverse individual, and my children are neurodiverse as well. So we already think about things in the world differently. And then there are all these, negative side effects of having such a learning disability, but there are all these positive side effects as well. And so every major weakness that we have is also a major strength. And I love listening to this podcast because it connects me with a group of super smart, super accomplished women all over the world who all have the same learning disability that I have. And so that makes me feel like I'm not alone and that maybe it's okay to be a little weird. And then I'm starting my own podcast. And our podcast, we're in production right now on our first episode. So I'm learning all the ins and outs of editing. And so it should be ready to go. We'll have 3 podcasts ready to go by April 1st. And the title of our podcast, which will be available on Spotify and Stitcher and iTunes, is We Grow Social Impact. And basically it's an in-depth look at, and we're going to be talking to social change makers all around the world about how to create positive change in your community, whether that's through philanthropy, volunteerism, public policy, and advocacy changes. So yeah, we just want to keep telling the stories of people doing great things all around the world.
Sounds great. So we will definitely check it out after April 1st, right?
Yes, after April 1st.
Okay. So thank you very much, Dr. Teilore, for this conversation. I really had great fun and learned a lot of new things. And I hope that you will have great luck with your podcast and keep doing good deeds, and you really motivate us also.
Hearts are with you, and hang in there. Keep doing the good things.